Elena Moreau grew up believing that life, though unpredictable, was guided by some kind of gentle fate. Her early years were filled with the quiet elegance of her family's estate on the eastern edge of the frontier. Her father, once a prosperous landowner, raised her with grace and education, teaching her to read, play piano, and speak politely to guests. Her mother ensured that she understood the expectations of society, how to host gatherings, how to carry herself with dignity, and how to be prepared for a respectable marriage one day. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A sudden illness swept through their town during one cruel winter, claiming both her parents within weeks of each other. Elena, only 16 then, was sent to live with her father's brother, Uncle Bernard, a stern man whose interest in her was motivated less by family loyalty and more by the opportunity to manage the remaining property. At first, Elena tried to be hopeful. She believed that if she worked hard and remained composed, her life would slowly return to stability. But her uncle treated her more as an inconvenience than a niece. He resented the extra mouth to feed and the responsibility of her future. As the years passed, things worsened. A series of poor harvests ruined what little income the estate generated. Debts began to pile up. Bernard gambled away what remained of their savings, hoping to win back their fortune, and failed spectacularly. By the time Elena turned 19, the estate had lost its value and most of the household staff had been dismissed. Their once vibrant house had turned quiet, cold, and decaying. Yet even amid misfortune, Elena found a glimmer of hope through a promising engagement. Thomas Vance, a wealthy merchant's son, began to court her. He was charming, well-mannered, and their union promised to restore some stability to her life. Her uncle encouraged the match enthusiastically, seeing it as a way to settle their debts and restore their standing. Elena, though uncertain of Thomas's true affections, convinced herself to be grateful for the opportunity. She told herself that perhaps this was fate's way of granting her a second chance, but on the eve of their engagement announcement, Thomas's father learned of their family's financial ruin. The dowry that had been promised no longer existed. Overnight, Thomas withdrew from the engagement without even the decency of a proper farewell. A brief, cold letter was all he sent, stating that circumstances have changed and he must think of his family's interests. Elena's uncle was furious not at Thomas, but at her. He accused her of being a burden, of failing to secure the future they needed. She realized in that moment that she was utterly alone. Within weeks, creditors began arriving at the estate, demanding repayment. Bernard, desperate and bitter, sold off what remained: the furniture, the horses, even her mother's piano. When that wasn't enough, he made a harsh decision. He would leave the estate altogether and start anew elsewhere, but he would not take Elena with him. There was no room, he said, for extra baggage. The night before he left, he handed her a small bundle of clothes, a few coins, and a one-way ticket on a westbound stagecoach. His words were final and cold. "You'll have to make your own way now." The next morning, under a gray sky, Elena stood outside the crumbling house for the last time. She clutched her worn shawl tightly around her shoulders as the wind whipped at her skirts. All she had known, her childhood, her family, her identity, was slipping away like sand through her fingers. She climbed onto the stagecoach among strangers, a miner heading west, a family seeking new land, a weary widow. No one knew her name. No one cared. As the coach rattled away from the estate, Elena pressed her forehead to the window pane and watched the landscape blur. Her heart ached not just from loss but from a profound sense of abandonment. Fate, she thought bitterly, had turned its back on her. There was no grand plan, no gentle guidance, only a cold road stretching into the unknown. She didn't know what awaited her at the other end, but staying behind was no longer an option. The chapter ends with Elena looking out into the horizon, the setting sun casting long shadows over the road. For the first time in her life, she is truly untethered, cast aside by destiny. Left to forge a future on her own, the westbound stagecoach rattled through endless miles of dry plains before finally arriving at a small frontier town named Dry Creek Junction. It wasn't the thriving place Elena had imagined from travelers' tales. Instead, it was a rough, wind-blown settlement of wooden buildings, mud-slick streets, and people hardened by survival. A single main road cut through the center, lined with a few shops, a saloon, a general store, and a weather-beaten church that leaned slightly to one side. This was not a place for delicate dreams. Elena stepped down from the coach clutching her small bundle, unsure where to go. Around her, people hurried with purpose, speaking in clipped, practical tones. A group of cowhands loaded supplies onto wagons. Dusty miners came and went from the saloon. No one paid her any mind. She quickly learned that in Dry Creek Junction, strangers were just that, strangers. No one asked questions, and no one offered help. Her first stop was the boarding house, a two-story building run by a sharp-eyed widow named Mrs. Callahan, who made it clear that charity was not part of her business. "Room's $2 a week," she said curtly, sizing Elena up. "Meals are extra. You can pay in advance." Elena handed over nearly all the coins her uncle had given her. She was allowed a small, drafty room with a creaky bed and a single cracked mirror. It wasn't much, but it was shelter for now. Over the next few days, Elena walked from door to door in search of work. She had never been raised to do hard labor, but she was willing to learn. She offered to sew, cook, clean anything to earn a living. Some shopkeepers were polite but dismissive. Others laughed at the idea of a refined girl surviving here. The women she met were worn and weary, their faces lined by sun and hardship. Most of them worked from dawn to nightfall just to keep food on the table. Elena began to see how truly unforgiving this world could be at night. She heard the sounds of the saloon drifting through the streets, rowdy laughter, piano music, fights breaking out, and sometimes a woman's cry. She understood quickly that many women here survived by doing things they would rather not. She swore she wouldn't let herself end up that way. But as her money dwindled, fear began to creep in. One evening, while walking back to the boarding house, she noticed a rugged man standing near his wagon on the edge of town. His clothes were simple but well kept, his hat pulled low, his face shadowed by the setting sun. He was loading supplies onto his wagon with practiced ease. There was something quiet and self-contained about him. Elena didn't know it then, but this was Daniel Carter, a reclusive rancher who lived miles outside of town. He gave her a brief, unreadable glance before returning to his work. She quickly looked away, embarrassed. She wasn't used to such direct stares. Determined to earn something, Elena finally found a position at Mrs. Haggerty's dress shop, where she was hired to do basic stitching and alterations. She worked long hours in a cramped, stuffy room behind the storefront. The pay was meager, but it was a start. She threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. But within a week, her hopes were crushed. When she went to collect her wages, Mrs. Haggerty coldly informed her that she had miscalculated. The hours in that Elena would receive only a fraction of what she was owed, barely enough to buy food. When Elena protested, the woman's smile turned sharp. "Take it or leave it," she said. Plenty of girls would kill for the work. That night, Elena sat alone in her tiny room, staring at the few coins in her hand. Her stomach growled with hunger. Her clothes were damp from rain, her boots worn thin. The world outside was not only harsh, it was indifferent. Her dreams of a fresh start were being eroded by the daily grind of survival. Then, everything changed one stormy night. A violent thunderstorm swept through Dry Creek Junction. Elena had stayed late at the dress shop finishing a client's order. and by the time she left, the streets were flooded with mud and rainwater. Wind howled through the alleys, tearing at her shawl. As she hurried toward the boarding house, she slipped on the slick ground and fell hard, twisting her ankle. She tried to get up, but pain shot through her leg. The rain soaked through her dress, chilling her to the bone. People passed by without stopping. No one wanted to risk the storm for a stranger. Through the sheets of rain, she saw a wagon approaching slowly. The driver pulled the reins and stopped. It was the same rugged man from before Daniel Carter. He stepped down, his hat shielding his face from the rain, and knelt beside her. "Can you stand?" he asked in a low, steady voice. She shook her head, shivering. Without another word, he lifted her into the wagon as if she weighed nothing and covered her with his heavy coat as the wagon rolled out of town toward the darkened plains. Elena clutched the coat tightly and stared at the stranger beside her. She didn't know where he was taking her, but for the first time in weeks, someone had stopped. Someone had cared enough to help. The storm raged through the night as Daniel Carter guided his wagon along the muddy road leading to his ranch. Elena, still shivering beneath his coat, struggled to understand how her life had shifted so abruptly. Hours ago, she had been alone in the rain with nowhere to turn. Now, she was at the mercy of a stranger whose eyes revealed little but caution. She didn't know if she should be afraid or relieved. They arrived at Daniel's ranch near midnight. His property was modest but well kept, a sturdy log house surrounded by wide fields, a barn, and a corral. A warm golden light spilled from the windows, standing in sharp contrast to the stormy night. Daniel lifted Elena gently from the wagon, careful of her injured ankle, and carried her inside. She protested weakly, embarrassed by the intimacy, but he ignored her objections. Inside, the house was simple and clean. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with warmth. Daniel set her down on a chair near the fire, fetched a dry blanket, and handed her a mug of hot tea without saying much. He moved with quiet efficiency, tending to the fire and preparing a poultice for her ankle. Elena watched him, unsure what to make of this silent, rugged man. He wasn't the type to offer empty reassurances. His kindness was practical, not performative. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even. "You're lucky I was passing by," he said. "That storm would have frozen you before morning." Elena nodded gratefully. "Thank you, truly. I didn't know where else to go." He didn't respond immediately, just wrapped her ankle firmly. "You'll stay here tonight. We'll see about tomorrow in the morning." The next day, Elena awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sounds of animals. Her ankle was still sore, but the swelling had gone down thanks to Daniel's care. She tried to insist on leaving, worried about being a burden, but Daniel refused to let her travel until she could walk properly. "You'd only get yourself hurt again," he said bluntly. As the days passed, a quiet rhythm developed between them. Elena, unwilling to simply sit idle, began helping around the house in small ways. She swept floors, prepared meals, and washed dishes, grateful to contribute something in return for his hospitality. She even helped mend a torn saddle strap and cleaned the old curtains, bringing a touch of softness to the otherwise austere home. Daniel didn't stop her, though he occasionally muttered that she didn't have to do so much. Through these daily tasks, Elena began to observe Daniel more closely. He was a man shaped by solitude, measured, careful, and deeply private. He lived alone on the ranch with only a few ranch hands who came and went for seasonal work. He rarely spoke of his past, but his silences carried weight. Sometimes late at night when she couldn't sleep, she noticed him sitting alone by the fire, staring into the flames with a distant, almost haunted look. Slowly, their conversations grew longer. Elena told him about her childhood, her family's downfall, and how she had come west hoping to build a new life. To her surprise, Daniel listened without judgment. She sensed that he understood pain, even if he didn't speak of his own. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the fields, he finally opened up a little. He spoke haltingly of his wife Clara and their young son, both of whom had died from fever years ago. Since then, he'd chosen to live in quiet isolation, finding solace in the land but shutting himself off from deeper connections. Elena's heart ached for him not with pity, but with recognition. They were both people who had lost everything, stranded between the past and an uncertain future. Something unspoken began to grow between them, fragile but real. She found herself looking forward to their shared meals, their quiet walks around the ranch, and even the rare moments when his stoic facade cracked into a faint, reluctant smile. Yet, beneath this growing closeness, there were walls neither dared to fully break. Daniel remained guarded, as if afraid that caring for someone again would reopen old wounds. Elena, on the other hand, struggled with feelings of unworthiness. She was a guest, a stranger, and she feared overstaying her welcome. Their delicate bond was interrupted when a letter arrived one afternoon, delivered by a passing rider from town. Daniel handed it to Elena wordlessly. The handwriting on the envelope made her heart freeze. It was her uncle's. Inside, the letter stated that someone from her past had been asking about her in Dry Creek Junction. Though vague, the message carried a chilling implication. Her old life wasn't finished with her yet. Elena's hands trembled as she read. She had come west to escape abandonment and misfortune, but it seemed the past was determined to find her. Daniel noticed the fear in her eyes, but she said little, folding the letter carefully and tucking it away. That night, as the wind howled outside, both of them lay awake, silently aware that their fragile sense of peace might soon be threatened. The letter from Elena's uncle arrived like a sudden gust of cold wind, unsettling the fragile peace she had begun to build at Daniel's ranch. For weeks, she had almost managed to forget the life she left behind, the decaying estate, the broken engagement, the shame of being cast out. But now, holding that letter in her trembling hands, she was reminded that her past had not disappeared. It had simply been waiting. The letter itself was brief, written in her uncle's familiar curt handwriting. He claimed that he had been searching for her and that a man in town had been asking questions about her whereabouts. Though he didn't name who it was, Elena knew instinctively that his sudden concern wasn't out of familial love. Uncle Bernard never did anything without personal gain. A chill ran down her spine as she imagined what motives lay behind his sudden interest. Daniel noticed her silence as she folded the letter and set it aside. "Bad news?" he asked evenly. Elena hesitated, then nodded. "My uncle. He knows I'm here, or close to here. I think he's trying to find me." Daniel frowned slightly. "What would he want now? You said yourself he pushed you out." She gave a bitter laugh. "Yes, when I was useless to him. But maybe he's found some use again. I wouldn't put it past him to sell my hand in marriage to clear his debts." Daniel didn't respond immediately, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. Though he tried to remain detached, something protective flickered in his eyes, a reaction that unsettled him as much as it surprised her. In the following days, an uneasy tension settled over the ranch. Elena tried to keep up with her daily tasks, cooking, mending, tending the small garden, but her mind was elsewhere. She feared every rider on the road, every distant figure approaching the house. At night, she lay awake, imagining the uncles. Men searching for her in town, plotting ways to drag her back. Daniel noticed the change in her. She laughed less, spoke less, and often looked over her shoulder. He wanted to ask more but held back, unsure how close he was allowed to get. His life had been built on keeping distance, on avoiding the pain of caring. Yet now, against his will, Elena's fear gnawed at him. Meanwhile, news trickled in from town through passing travelers. A pair of well-dressed men had been asking questions about a young woman traveling alone, flashing money for information. They were staying at the local saloon and seemed determined to find her. The rumors reached Daniel's ranch hands, who brought the story to him. He said nothing to Elena at first, not wanting to alarm her further, but the knowledge weighed heavily on him. One evening, while they were sitting on the porch as the sky turned gold and pink, Daniel finally spoke. "If these men come here," he said slowly, "do you want me to send them away?" Elena looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I don't want trouble for you. This is your home. I have no right to bring danger here." "This isn't about rights," Daniel replied firmly. "If you don't want to go back, I won't let them take you." His words startled her. She met his gaze, seeing in his eyes a seriousness that made her heart race. No one had ever offered to stand up for her before, not like this. But before she could respond, he abruptly stood and walked inside as if afraid of what he'd just revealed. That night, Elena made a difficult decision. She couldn't let Daniel be caught up in her past. She had brought enough chaos into his quiet life. If her uncle's men came, they could harm his property, his livelihood. She didn't want to be the reason he suffered again. The next morning, Daniel awoke to find her gone. Her room was neatly made, her few belongings packed away. On the table lay a folded note, written in her graceful handwriting. "Daniel, you've shown me more kindness than I ever expected to receive again, but I can't let my past endanger you. It's better this way. Elena." He stared at the letter for a long time, his chest tightening in a way he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since losing his wife and child, someone had slipped past his emotional defenses, and now she had vanished. Anger, fear, and something deeper he didn't dare name surged within him. He saddled his horse immediately, riding toward town, following the faint trail of wagon wheels and footprints left in the soft morning earth. Meanwhile, Elena made her way toward Dry Creek Junction, determined to face whatever awaited her. She knew she couldn't run forever, but with each mile, doubt grew heavier in her chest. She remembered Daniel's quiet strength, his rare smiles, and the unexpected sense of belonging she'd found at the ranch. Leaving had seemed noble in theory, but now, alone on the open road, it felt like tearing out a piece of herself. As the sun climbed higher, distant figures on horseback appeared behind her. She froze. Her uncle's men had found her faster than she expected. Daniel rides into town, unaware that Elena may already be in danger. Both of their pasts and choices are about to collide, setting the stage for a turning point that will decide their future. Elena's decision to leave. Daniel's ranch was made with the intention of protecting him. But as she rode toward Dry Creek Junction in a hired wagon, she felt the weight of loneliness settle over her like a heavy cloak. The road stretched endlessly before her, and each turn of the wheels seemed to echo the doubts growing in her chest. She had spent months running from her past, but now it had finally cornered her. She knew that returning to town meant facing whatever schemes her uncle had planned, and possibly losing the fragile new life she had begun to build. Not long after arriving, Elena's fears became reality. As she stepped off the wagon near the general store, two well-dressed men appeared almost immediately. She recognized one of them from her uncle's estate years ago, Mr. Grant, a ruthless associate who often handled Bernard's dirty business dealings. "Miss Moreau," he said smoothly, removing his hat with mock politeness, "we've been looking for you." Elena's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "Why?" "My uncle made it clear he didn't want me." "Circumstances have changed," Mr. Grant replied with a sly smile. "Your uncle has found a suitor, someone willing to take care of those unpleasant debts. You'll come with us quietly, and everything will be resolved nicely." Elena's stomach turned. She understood exactly what this meant. She was to be bartered like property once again. married off to a stranger to benefit her uncle's reputation and finances. "No," she said firmly. "I won't." Grant's smile disappeared. He nodded to the other man, who stepped closer. "I think you misunderstand. This isn't a choice." Before she could react, they seized her by the arms and pulled her toward their waiting carriage. Elena struggled, shouting for help, but the busy streets seemed to turn indifferent eyes. In towns like Dry Creek Junction, people knew better than to interfere in other people's troubles. Within moments, Elena was forced inside the carriage. The door slammed shut, and they began the journey out of town toward a remote estate where, she feared, her future would be decided for her. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Daniel discovered Elena's note. The quiet ache that had been simmering inside him since she arrived now flared into something fierce and undeniable. He saddled his horse and rode hard toward Dry Creek Junction, his heart pounding with a mix of fear, anger, and determination. He told himself he was only going to make sure she was safe, but deep down he knew the truth. He couldn't lose her. Not after everything. When he reached town, he quickly learned from a stable boy that two men had taken a woman matching Elena's description in a carriage heading east. Without hesitation, Daniel spurred his horse and took off down the dusty road. Following the tracks. Inside the carriage, Elena sat rigid, trying to think clearly. Panic wouldn't save her now. She remembered everything she had endured, the betrayals, the abandonment, the harsh frontier. She realized that for too long she had allowed others to dictate her fate. Her uncle, Thomas, society, even her circumstances. But here now she had a choice. She refused to be powerless any longer. She waited until the carriage slowed to cross a small wooden bridge, then acted swiftly. Using her elbow, she smashed the glass window, grabbed the latch from the outside, and threw herself out of the moving carriage. She hit the ground hard, scraping her hands and knees, but she scrambled to her feet and limped toward the tree line. The men shouted behind her and gave chase. Just as they were closing in, a distant sound thundered down the road, the pounding of horse hooves. Daniel burst into view, riding fast and furious. His arrival shocked the pursuers, giving Elena precious seconds. He leapt from his horse and charged at the men with a kind of ferocity born of years of buried grief and a sudden, undeniable need to protect. A struggle broke out, mud, fists, shouts, but Daniel fought with precision and strength. One of the men lunged at Elena, but she grabbed a broken branch from the ground and struck him across the face, refusing to be helpless. Together, she and Daniel overpowered the two men. By the time it was over, they were both breathing heavily, covered in mud and rain. But victorious. In the aftermath, Daniel turned to her, his voice rough with emotion. "Why did you leave?" Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "Because I didn't want my past to hurt you. You've already lost so much. I couldn't bear to bring trouble to your door." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity. "You think I care about that? Elena, I'd rather face trouble with you than live in peace without you." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The storm clouds overhead began to break, revealing a sliver of sunlight. Elena realized that Daniel wasn't just offering protection, he was offering partnership. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running or being forced into a future she didn't choose. She was standing beside someone who wanted to face the world with her, not control her. As they rode back toward the ranch, exhausted but alive, Elena felt a sense of clarity she'd never known before. Her uncle's reach might not be gone entirely, but she was no longer the frightened girl who boarded a stagecoach with nowhere to go. She was stronger now, and she had someone who believed in her strength too. This was the moment she truly chose her own destiny, not one written by fate or forced by others, but one she would build with her own hands and heart. The return journey to Daniel's ranch was quiet, but it was a silence heavy with emotion rather than distance. Elena sat behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The rain had finally stopped, and the sky above was streaked with gold and soft pink, like a promise of renewal after the storm. Neither of them spoke, but in that silence, something between them had shifted permanently. When they arrived at the ranch, the once familiar surroundings felt different to Elena. This wasn't merely a refuge anymore. It felt like home. Daniel helped her down from the horse, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. She saw in his gaze a mixture of relief, fierce protectiveness, and something deeper that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. The following days were a gentle contrast to the chaos they had endured. Life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm, but now there was an unspoken bond between them. Elena resumed her daily tasks, cooking, tending to the animals, sewing repairs, but with a new sense of belonging. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was part of this place, part of Daniel's world. Daniel, for his part, was different too. He still maintained his quiet demeanor, but there was a softness in his actions now. He found excuses to talk to her more often, lingering in the kitchen doorway while she cooked, or helping her hang laundry even though he never used to. At night, they often sat together on the porch in silence, watching the stars. It wasn't awkward. It was warm, natural, and real. Despite this newfound peace, Elena knew there were decisions to be made. Her uncle's men had been defeated, but that didn't mean Bernard would give up easily. She considered leaving again to protect Daniel from any further threats. But this time, the thought filled her with dread rather than resolve. She had run from her past long enough. One crisp morning, as the autumn sun rose over the fields, Elena found Daniel fixing a broken fence near the pasture. She approached slowly, gathering her courage. "Daniel," she began, her voice steady, "I've been thinking. I can't keep living in fear of what my uncle might do. I need to take control of my life once and for all. But I don't want to do it alone anymore." Daniel paused, leaning on the fence post, and studied her carefully. "You're not alone," he said simply. His words struck her deeply. For so long, Elena had believed that to survive, she had to rely on no one but herself. But Daniel wasn't trying to control her future. He was offering to stand beside her as she built it. That evening, under a sky full of stars, Daniel finally opened up in a way he never had before. They sat together on the porch, the lantern casting a warm glow. He spoke softly about Clara and their son, about the years of silence and emptiness that followed their deaths. "I told myself I didn't need anyone," he admitted. "It was easier to keep the world out than to risk losing it again." Elena listened, her hand resting lightly on his. "And now?" she asked. He met her gaze, his eyes clear and unwavering. "Now I see that shutting the world out isn't living. It's just existing. And I don't want to just exist anymore, Elena. Not if it means pushing you away." Her heart swelled at his words. Tears shimmered in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of quiet joy. She realized that the unlikely bond they had formed was no accident. Fate might have abandoned her once, but love unexpected, unplanned, and pure had found her where she least expected it. In the weeks that followed, Elena took bold steps to secure her future. She wrote a firm letter to her uncle, making it clear that she would not be coerced or controlled anymore. She also reached out to a lawyer in town to ensure that any claims he might try to make over her inheritance or her decisions would be legally dismissed. For the first time, she was taking ownership of her destiny. Daniel stood by her through it all, not as a savior, but as a partner. He didn't try to solve everything for her, but his steady presence gave her the strength to face what once terrified her. As autumn turned to winter, the ranch transformed under their shared care. They repaired fences together, prepared for the colder months, and slowly merged their lives. It wasn't a sudden sweeping romance. It was quiet and deliberate, built on mutual trust, respect, and the shared scars of the past. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Daniel and Elena stood on the porch wrapped in a single blanket. The land stretched before them, white and still, bathed in the soft glow of lantern light. Daniel turned to her and said softly, "You could have a life anywhere. But if you want it here, with me, you'd make this place feel like home again." Elena smiled, her heart full. "I don't want to run anymore," she whispered. "I want to build something real. With you." They stood there beneath the falling snow, two souls who had been broken by fate but found healing in each other's arms. For Elena, it was the first time she truly felt chosen not by destiny, not by circumstance, but by love.